Let's get this party started with Yars Revenge. Designed by Howard Scott Warsaw and released in 1982. As with most Atari games, you're gonna have to use your imagination a little bit with this one. The story here is that you're playing as Yar. Yar! This giant insect that kinda looks like Mothra. You're trying to kill this evil Kotile monster on the right side of the screen, but he's protected by a barrier that you have to take out first. There's also this crazy looking barrier called a neutral zone in the middle of the screen. The unique look of the neutral zone barrier was created by some sort of graphical glitch accidentally discovered while they were programming, and they just sort of went with it. You can't shoot through the barrier if you're in the middle of it or on the other side of it. The Kotile fires a heat-seeking missile that follows you around for the entire round, but you're safe if you stay inside the neutral zone. The Kotile also occasionally does a swirl attack that can kill you anywhere. The goal here is to take out enough of the barrier surrounding the Kotile and then get up close and arm your big weapon. Now, this is called a Zorlon cannon. Once you touch the right side of the screen, the cannon is armed, and pressing the fire button fires the cannon instead of your regular fire attack. The cannon locks onto the location wherever you touch the screen, so there's some strategy here. You're trying to hit the Kotile, which is always moving, albeit in a pattern, and you have to make sure you move out of the way so that you don't accidentally shoot yourself. Yeah, that's a thing. If you hit the Kotile, you're treated to a freaking awesome death scene. It could have just been a simple explosion, but no, it's a total ordeal. Between that and the barrier, this game has some fairly impressive sequences, even if it's repetitive. It's also a lot of fun and requires you to constantly be moving and thinking about your next plan of attack. Donkey Kong. Developed originally for the arcades by Nintendo in 1981 and later ported to the 2600 by Coleco. Okay, the Coleco port of this game is an absolute turd compared to the original arcade version. Donkey Kong looks like a hot dog sprouted legs, the barrels look like cookies, and the fireballs on screen too look like gravy boats? In fact, it wasn't until much later when I finally got a chance to play Donkey Kong on the real arcade cabinet that I realized those were supposed to be fireballs at all. It's a drastically tough sell going from this to this. The port's lead programmer, Gary Kitchen, mentioned in an interview that the original ROM should have been put on at least a 6K cartridge. At the time, 8K cartridges were available, but Coleco insisted the game be placed on a 4K cartridge to cut down on manufacturing costs, and probably to boost sales of their own ColecoVision console, which had a much better port of Donkey Kong on it. So, I guess when you look at it that way, they're lucky they were even able to pull this off on the 2600 given what they had to work with. But here's the thing, 4-year-old me didn't know any better or care about any of that. I was too young to go to the arcades, so this was all I knew. It was a game we had, I played the crap out of it, and I'll always have fond memories of jumping over those gravy boats trying to take out the bridges. Frogger. This is another one of those games that my family just always had on Atari, and it was a regular in the rotation of games we played. It's a simple concept. You play as a frog trying to make your way across crowded city traffic and an overly active rushing river to get back to your little froggy base, and score points on the way. Easy enough, but there's all kinds of things trying to kill you. Semis, speeding cars, snowplows, these cars that look like the Fred Flintstone mobile, snakes, and when you cross the river you've got speeding logs, chomping alligators, although you can ride on their backs. Sometimes the alligators even show up in your home base. And there were these circles that you can ride on, but sometimes they sink. So, for the longest time when I was a kid, I always thought these were lily pads of some sort, but the manual says they're actually turtles. The red circles are turtles that will constantly float, while the blue turtles are ones that may or may not dive down under the water. If they dive down while you're riding on them, you're sunk. On top of all this, you've got a timer for each round constantly winding down in the corner. Occasionally, you'll see a white frog moving around on one of the logs. The manual says it's actually a lady frog. Occasionally, you'll see a white lady frog hopping frantically along a log. If you hop Frogger onto her and take her home, you'll score bonus points. Like any good Atari game, the difficulty ramps up beyond rational playability after the first couple rounds. Why would that many snowplows move in formation like that? The objects on the screen drastically multiply in speed and numbers while the round timer gets shorter and shorter. It's impressive though to see how many objects they were able to cram on the screen at once, and it actually plays really smooth, even when all heck is breaking loose on screen. The graphics are simple, but the game is still super fun and addictive. It's just as easy to pick up and play today as it was 30 years ago.
I've been driving cattle most of my natural life, and you're telling me I can't handle a Stampede?
Not this one, Buck.
Stampede by Activision for your Atari game system. One of the toughest video games around. Stampede's more than expert roping and ride. It's a test of strategy and skill.
Go ahead, you do it.
Your hands on the right.
Buck, you boys come in now.
Oh, Ma.
Stampede by Activision.
Well, now listen here, partner. We're about to rustle up some Atari 2600 fun. It's Stampede, developed and released by Activision way back in 1981. Yeehaw! Okay, I promise I won't ever do that again. This game was written by Bob Whitehead, who also designed one of my other favorites, Chopper Command. On the surface, the idea about playing as a cowboy trying to lasso up cattle, compared to all the other possible video game scenarios, may seem, a little dry, but this game is surprisingly addictive, even though I never was very good at it. Plus, when there's only like 15 or 20 titles in your shoebox full of Atari games as a kid, what else are you gonna play? Eventually, it's gonna make it through your rotation. Actually though, it's quite good. There's some strategy involved because your lasso has a very specific range. Each color of cattle goes at a different speed, so you have to think about what order you want to lasso them in, and sometimes there's black cattle that are just kind of stuck there. You can only miss so many cattle before you die and have to restart the game, but you get an extra miss for every 1,000 points you rack up. The cattle will also run forward a little faster if you just get behind them, and this is an important strategy because since it takes so long to complete a full lasso maneuver, you may have to nudge one group of cattle forward and then run back the other way to catch one of the stationary cattle. I never got very far in this game, but I still played the heck out of it. Man, when I was like 5, Gremlins was my favorite movie. I rented it over and over again from the movie store to the point where finally my parents just broke down and bought it for me. As far as I can recall, it was the first VHS film I ever owned, and I still have that copy to this day. And somehow or another, Gremlins the Atari game came to be in our family's possession. I can't specifically remember if it was my cousin that owned it or me, but we always played it. You play as the movie's main character, Billy Peltzer, and gameplay is broken down into 2 screens. The first is essentially a ripoff of Kaboom, where you have to catch the Mogwai before they fall into the food and eat it after midnight. Then these hoagie sandwiches spontaneously turn into cocoons anyway, and the second screen is essentially a ripoff of Space Invaders with the gremlins marching towards you and you have to shoot them. Lather, rinse, repeat until the game speeds up, the gremlins multiply, and you either die or quit. Still, it was fun for what it was, and I didn't think the graphics were all that bad when I was a kid. The detailed backgrounds were neat looking compared to most Atari games. I also always thought the sounds of the gremlins marching toward you was kinda cool and ominous. Well, that wraps it up for this week's episode. These were some of my favorite Atari 2600 games, but what about yours? What are some of the games you grew up with? And what are some of your favorite games that you perhaps discovered more recently? As always, thank you for watching. Please don't text and drive, and I'll see you next time on Friday Night Arcade.